Welcome to another edition of Living with Purpose. Today, I have an extraordinary person, somebody who I am deeply fond of, and somebody that has been instrumental in my growth at Microsoft, Jean-Philippe Courtois, who was the former executive vice president at Microsoft, somebody that ran Microsoft's global sales team, has played multiple roles at Microsoft, and has also been instrumental in the social entrepreneurship space with his foundation, Live for Good, where he has been supporting and mentoring social entrepreneurs in France for over a decade. So please join me in welcoming Jean-Philippe Courtois. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Acton. As you know, you can call me JP as well, but your French accent is perfect.
So let's start this extraordinary journey with your childhood and then being introduced to technology and then your podcast, Positive Leadership, which has now had over 1 million views.
Actually, close to $3 million soon.
Yeah, so this is incredible, right? So you've kind of been this amazing figure in the technology and leadership space. So just let's start off with your journey.
I was born at the time, a territory which was French in Nigeria, actually, in North Africa. And this is where my family, 3 generations of myself, went there and established our family and community there. And as many of the listeners may know not, actually, it's just small part of the French history, honestly. Nigeria became independent in 1962. And that was when I was 18 months old. We had to flee with my whole family, my dad, my 2 sisters, my grandmom. Really nothing, just a couple of luggage and flying to metropolitan France. So basically the country. And that was a very interesting, I would say, early years in the sense that I could see the way my dad, I could see the way my mom, my family, an entire community of what we call in French, Quinoa Blackfeet. This is just the naming of those French people who are living abroad, right? In Africa, including Nigeria, but also in other countries. But when we were back in our basically home country, France, we are treated as migrants, which is a big theme of the days globally.
Right.
And, in a way, I can relate to many of those people and lives across the world who decided for different reasons to go somewhere to basically build a new life. And this is what my family did since 1830. And then we're back in France where we were really not welcome at all. We were basically treated as, almost illegal migrants, and basically preventing my dad as a general practitioner to do his job so that he could actually take care of his family and, and earn some money, which he did when he was in a job that he couldn't do. But he did it eventually. And it taught me a lot about that sense of belonging. It taught me a lot about that giving back to the community, helping each other, a very strong sense of solidarity and pride as well. And pride of our roots, where we come from, of our traditions, but also really, blending into this new community, which is basically France as a country. And of course, as a nationality, which has always been French, by the way, even when I was born in Nigeria, was actually French. So anyway, that was the starting point of my childhood, very formative in the US.
So here you are, and you settled in the southern part of France, in Nice. In Nice, you went to school there. How was that experience of going to school? And then how did you eventually come into the space of business and computers?
It was, like I think for many people, lives kind of a series of actually meeting with people, but also chance in a way. So I went through the public school system in France with basically like any kids would go and work pretty well. But at one point, I decided to go to business school, which was really very new to my family and dad, because my dad was a job practitioner. My older sister was also already into medicine, and my second sister at the time was studying medicine as well. So I was the only one who decided to be a doctor. And I did it not because I was passionate about business. Honestly, at the time, I had very little understanding what a business was. But I just met a couple of people, basically, who knew my dad, told me about the way that that type of organization was spreading economic value, the way that people could actually drive some innovation and stuff. And that's the reason why I decided to basically go to business school in Sophia Antipolis, which is the tech hub of France and actually a big tech hub in Europe as well. And this is where I got in love with the very early personal computer, the days. It was the time of the Apple II. For those of you maybe who are not even born, Apple II was the first PC before the IBM PC became the standard and MS-DOS, of course, with it. And at the time, with a friend of mine, who's still one of my very best friends, Didier, we developed, we marketed an accounting software for small businesses. And I just found out this incredible, actually hyper-growth industry, which was just nascent. It was just starting. It was microscopic at the time. and we're there, very lucky in a way to be there and to see with fascination that the power of that personal computer could change the world. And so one day, after doing a couple of years as an entrepreneur, because we're actually independent freelancer developing the software, which went away so well, we sold a few thousand copies. So at the time, of course, it's not hundreds of millions of copies of Steve, but if you put that back in perspective, with very small, thin sales of PCs, it was a pretty big deal. It was actually one of the fastest selling software packages in France and also selling in Europe in the country. Anyways, long story short, I know a ton, and again, by chance, I met a headhunter who sold me a job to sell hardware, and I told this headhunter, no, I don't build hardware. I was already very, still conviction, and said, I want to get the software. He said, oh, okay. Here's something for you. I've got this small company just starting in the suburbs, actually pretty cool suburbs of Paris, to tell the truth. In this release, it was actually a very popular suburb. At the time, my stuff was kind of cheap. I mean, we had the money. That's, nice location. And I went there to the train from this, which is a long train ride, about 10 hours, going from south to north to the big capital. And I met with amazing people. Michel Macron and Bernard Ver, the founders of Microsoft France, and then became eventually CEOs of Microsoft Europe and EMEA. And then the rest became history. It's the way I decided to join Microsoft like that.
So let's just kind of go back just a little bit. You were at that time selling the software on Mac, correct?
On PCs and Macs as well. Yes.
And quite a connection with doing work with Apple at that time also.
Absolutely.
Before joining Microsoft, one of the few people that has actually been able to straddle both worlds. Let me just, for our listeners, give a sense of the nascent industry of software, selling thousands of copies, to what you eventually ran, where you actually had over 400 million copies of Office on desktops around the world, right? So you were kind of running an organization that had grown from selling few thousand copies to hundreds of millions of copies. I just want our listeners to kind of understand the scale at which the industry has grown.
Yeah, that's right. So it's kind of scenario. Obviously, it's been 4 decades, which these days seems like a century, right? At the pace of AI. But what it taught me a ton is the way you scale. The way you scale not just an organization, a team, but the way you scale as a leader, as an individual. And I had so many lessons, painful, gratifying ones as well, to that journey. That really, in many ways, shaped my leadership style, shaped who I am as well, and the leadership of this incredible company.
So let's talk back about Microsoft. So here you are. And what was your role when you joined Microsoft? You did want to do hardware, so here you are in a software company.
Yeah.
And you suddenly moved to the north of France, to Paris, outside of Paris.
Yep.
And then what were you doing?
So my very first job was at the time called systems engineer, which seems to be very technical. It was kind of technical sales. What I had to do, there was the first kind of sales person to do that, was to travel all across France, you know, which is not as big as US, obviously, much smaller, just like a couple of states. But with my Renault 11, kind of a pretty small car, a big compact portable, 12, 15 kilos on my shoulders, I went to like dozens of cities across the country to recruit resellers and partners of the future of Microsoft ecosystem. Because as a company, we believe in the early days that the way we democratize technology would be by enabling and transforming a huge network of partners, developers, again, resellers, consulting companies, training, and I did that. So when every city had their Bordeaux, Nantes, whatever, Lille, with my compact, I opened my compact portable and was doing demos of every first software on Microsoft. Such, well, obviously, it's, I was not demoing MS-DOS at the time because it's not like a sexy demo to do. But we had a couple of applications starting to sell like multi-plan. Yeah, for many listeners, they probably don't even understand that multi-plan was the first spreadsheet Microsoft developed before Excel. And of course, many also development tools, compilers, and many other applications in the world and so on. And then for the PC and the Mac. So my role, in essence, was to recruit a powerful network of partners who could resell and who could develop solutions on the Microsoft platform, MS-DOS, and then the Windows world, obviously, when Windows up and Windows was launched.
So just for our listeners to kind of understand, today people see the App Store or the Google Store, and you see lots of different people creating products that they can sell. Microsoft, in the very early days, has actually created that model of resellers and developers around the world that would adopt the Microsoft platform and then build new products on top of that. And that was really Microsoft's secret sauce of how it grew from being a small company, first in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and then right with Washington to where it is today. So you played an instrumental part, right, in this journey of developing this network and why that was important. So talk a little bit about that and also about relationships that you decided to form with governments at the national level.
Yeah, so I'm going to see the first throw on my career because I want to annoy the audience, but rapidly was given the responsibility to open new markets in Europe, in Southern Europe, in Portugal, in Spain, in Greece, in the Netherlands. And in that capacity, I was kind of course, I never took it seriously as the mini Bill Gates, right? Representing Microsoft in the country, opening partnerships in those countries, localizing our software because there was no ways we would sell world in English for Portuguese customers, not they needed the Portuguese versions. And as you do that, and of course, as the technology sector, software sector started to mature, governments starting to lean in, right? Because they understood that, well, okay, that seems interesting to embrace this future. So because of that, early on, actually, in my career, I started to get engaged with governments. And obviously, later on in my career, as particularly when I became the CEO of EMEA, a few years later, and then international, globally, it was one of the facets of my job to have a responsible and valuable partnership with every government where we operate as a company.
So, yeah, I'm quite sure our listeners want to hear a little bit about your working with some of the leadership in the company, your connections with Bill Gates, Steve Ballmer, Paul Allen, Jeff Riggs, and others. So talk a little bit about the leadership climate at Microsoft and you as a young person, somebody that is not native to the US,
Yes.
is interacting at that level.
Again, super interesting for me as a young newcomer, a French native, obviously, to learn about the American culture because before that first job, I'd never been in touch with any American company. Never, ever. Maybe a couple of Americans, but very few, very little understanding. And rapidly, the opportunity again as a typical responsibility to get in touch with the accountants, starting as well with incredible people like Jeff Riggs, yes, with a very good friend as well, by the way, with the founder of Microsoft Office. For those of you who don't know that, he's the one who brought together the concept of packaging together all the 360 tools in one package. And I had the opportunity to move with my family, by the way, to Seattle, to Bellevue, in the late 90s to work for Jeff when he was the head of sales globally. And Jeff was and is still a wonderful servant leader. Someone who works in the service of the people, the teams, and always setting high standards in terms of capturing market share, delivering more value to customers, and always finding, in a way, the right balance in terms of focus between the tech engine of the company, developers, and the front face of the company, the sellers. And it's been something I learned a lot from Jeff in the early days. Obviously, when I think about those days in the 80s and the 90s as well, many opportunities to travel with Bill, who was as a CEO at the time, very much, in touch with all many, not just subsidiaries, countries around the world, because Bill was always incredibly curious about the way technology was adopted or not, slowly or fast by country, the way we were developing unique also, advantage at the country level. In a way, we could form some strategic policy with large companies, with governments, sometimes with NGOs as well. Of course, I learned a ton from Bill. I mean, incredible competitiveness, incredible depth in everything it gets into in terms of the details, the data-led analysis, and again, the pursuit for excellence all the time and growth. So it's been very intense but amazing to learn from Bill. And we're not just stop there, but obviously had a wonderful opportunity to work and partner with Steve Ballmer. Just before he became a CEO, actually came and lived a couple of months in Paris and a couple of months in Japan, which I think is a wonderful way actually for the future of CEO to get grounded in reality of the business beyond the domestic market, of course, the US, that he knew well, to really the countries. I saw him in action, being incredibly open to learn from Germany, UK, France, other countries, all the world doing business, which at the time was very entrepreneurial. Each one of us had its own marketing strategy, little market, da, da, da. And of course, after a while, he decided to harmonize that and bring that together as a global kind of blueprint for the company, which was a wise step to take. And I have many, many memories of Steve in action, sometimes very intense as well, in terms of the famous video reviews that we did as well. Legendary, actually, exercise video Microsoft for 20 years or plus, actually, until the day I killed them when I was the head of global sales. And I said, enough of that. For those of you who don't know any reviews, it was a creation, actually, that Bill Steve started to do, which was an in-depth business review halfway through the fiscal year in January of all our subsidiaries across the world and every business in a company. So for 7 weeks, leadership, including myself, were locked into rooms, reviewing our teams one by one, very intimate. Some people later on say, well, it became eventually like almost you and assembly. So they were very critical because there are many guys you could see a single round of table, third round table of the observers, anyways. But it was an incredible learning school for many of our actually upcomers and leaders. And it's the way I learned as well, talking about the business, coaching people, seeing some of the best talents for the future of the company, and also learning from them on the front line, which I always believe in so strongly, to get the feedback into Redmond, into the people who build the products. Because the thing that seems the most simple, which is always the hardest, I think for any large global scale company, is connecting and aligning completely the people who build the products and the people who sell the products.
So here's all of these lessons that you learned, and you've now kind of taken that into your podcast on positive leadership. So do you want to just talk a little bit about the genesis behind positive leadership you had these amazing guests on your podcast. I mean, some of these most influential people in the world. And can you just distill a few learnings that you got from that for our listeners?
Yeah, so I started this venture for me, actor, more than 4 years ago when I was still working at Microsoft. I decided to do it for the following reason. For the last decade and plus in my life, I've embraced that leadership style, which, I did not create, as you know well. It's a school of leadership that was created on the back of positive psychology, neuroscience, and some other, I would say, mindfulness and other techniques of leadership. And I did it because I had to go through my own transformation at Microsoft. As I became the EVP, as we said, of the global sales marketing operations team, Satya Nadella tasked me to transform the entire sales force of the company and to embark on the full transformation from selling software licenses to our clients to becoming a digital advisors to any company on the planet at large scale. And to me, that means transforming myself, changing my mindset, becoming a coach-like leader, becoming someone who is not only hungry to learn more from anyone, any level, any layer of innovation, any customers, but someone as well who is working on himself to manage and develop his positive energy, to bring it to others, to bring it into the meetings with your colleagues, with your teams, with your customers, with your system. And by doing that, opening doors to co-build, to develop positive solutions together. The positive solution means business solution as well, obviously, but that can drive a positive impact in the success of the customers. And the second factor that drove me to get into the podcast actor was obviously the creation of my foundation, Live for Good, which was created 10 years ago now. And Live for Good is an NGO I founded with my family in memory of my late son, Gabriel. And the vision we have, as you briefly said in the introduction, is to reveal the potential of youth from all walks of life to social entrepreneurship. In essence, as I did that, I realized the incredible power of that new generation of young people. And by coaching them, supporting them to become and express their power of positive leaders, to have really a downstream effect which was much bigger than themselves in every community in the country. So that's what I did for the podcast. And I had so many guests now, I think close to 150, from CEOs in Ranuri, Paul Paulman, Satya Nadella, many more, from authors of positive psychology like Martin Seligman, Barbara Fredson, Tim Cameron, to receive a few folks from Microsoft, Satya Nadella, Kevin Scott, Kathleen Hogan, and many others. Adriana Huffington as an example, but also Boyan Swat, who is a change maker, social innovator, and many others. So isn't it a wonderful journey every 2 weeks? I'm taking a class to tell the truth. But preparing my episode with those incredible leaders, my next episode, don't know at the time of this of the podcast we do, but it's going to be someone incredible, I know, really. Nick Thompson, the CEO of the Atlantic in the US, I'm sure you know well as a media. And it was wonderful to understand where Nick is coming, his background, his family, is running around, and impact is added through a different view of media in the US and what it means in the society of today. Anyway, let me stop there. I could keep going.
No. This is great. So let's turn to what are a couple of insights that you want to share with our listeners around positive leadership that you have heard from these wonderful guests that you have had on your podcast.
Yeah, let me share a few of those high-level kind of big learning. Number one, all those people understanding, defining their why. Why they're here? What is their purpose? And you know what I mean by purpose, because you've been somewhere working deeply. And we had also, the two of us, a good episode on that, by the way, with Acta, on purpose, leadership as well. That's number one. Why? Your raison d'être, as we say in French. Number two is also many of them have worked on themselves to nurture their positive energy, which means taking care of yourself physically, emotionally, from a cognitive standpoint as well, in terms of the social connection as well. And it's something that all of them do in a way or another, not just through the business, it could be through NGOs, communities, schools, it can take so many flavors. And the third aspect of many of them, again in their own unique ways, is the ongoing quest they have to drive a positive impact in their portfolio of activities. And so, as I have those deep conversations, it's always enlightening to me and honestly very inspiring to get so many nuggets of positive leadership and impact they have because of their philosophy of living service to the people and the planet, essentially. Why being successful? In a way that most people measure lives, which is not necessarily my own definition of success in terms of business, financial success. We have a more holistic way of defining success in terms of the number of lives that be truly impacted through their actions and what they do day by day.
These are such wonderful distillation. Let me see if I can actually get a similar distillation from you around some of the lessons that you've learned with your foundation and working with these young entrepreneurs. What have you learned from them?
What I've learned from them, first of all, is never give up. Never give up. And you can say this is a mantra for any entrepreneur, but even more so for an impact entrepreneur because it's harder, it's tougher to find this balance between economics, environment, social. So never give up. The second one is, again, the deep, deep alignment between their personal purpose and the mission of their startup, of their social enterprise. There needs to be a tight alignment, a chemistry, because in a way, the mission of their organization, of the project they're going to bring to life, is a transformation of their own why. And that's something I've learned deeply in so many personal stories, tough ones, exciting ones, all the time. And the third one is, guess what? The more time I spend with those kids, and the more, and the happier I am, the more joy I get in my life. Because they are at the opposite of those toxic people you may find in your lives. Well, they are just to get something from you, to sometimes, basically drive paralysis or fear. They are at the anti-opposite. They are there to truly embrace the world in an open way, in a positive way, and elevate their game and capacity to change the world.
This has been such a fantastic conversation. Let's end by you sharing with us your one golden nugget, a piece of wisdom that you would want to share with our listeners.
Well, that's always hard to pick one nugget. I think you must pick again on one nugget, which will be I think a summary of the discussion. I will come back to this one, which means so clear. You've got to set your why. You've got to be clear with your why. Because if you're not starting with clarity with your why, and in all dimensions of your life, you're going to get busy, you're going to do a number of things, but I think you'll never be able to fulfill your real potential. So that'll be my nugget, if I select one. Please pay attention, give you the time, the pauses, the slowness sometimes, to find yourself, to find the why within yourself, so that then you can shape your life and the world and the impact you want to have in the world.
This is such an important message, which I want to kind of reframe for our audience before we end. First and foremost, your personal why, your why, not your business why, not your work why, but your personal why, and discovering that and articulating that and growing through that is critical. And then the second, which I so much believe in, is show up with joy. If you're able to show up with joy and positive energy, you can change the world. You can make a difference. And at the end of the day, joy is not about you. It is about you in your community, in your environment, in your world. And that coexistence is really what Jean-Philippe has been talking about. And he kind of ended his 3 points that he gave both for the social entrepreneurs and for the lessons that he's learned from the leaders that he's worked with, is showing up for positive impact. This personal quest to delivering positive impact. And that's what brings joy. Jean-Philippe, thank you so very much for being on the podcast and spending time with us. Again, to our listeners, purpose is that renewable source of energy. It continues to drive humanity forward. Articulate your why. Show up with your why. Jean-Philippe, thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Arthur. It was a wonderful conversation as always.